Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome back to my Star Wars Universe Ranked and Reviewed series. Kind of more of a podcast than a video series, but I think that it's always fun to talk Star Wars, and I had to take a little bit of a break from the series after finishing, or trying to finish, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. It took me a while to get that series done, and then I just needed a Star Wars break. But you know what? Ahsoka has come on. I've been watching the first, what are we at, 5 episodes of this now, and I'm just like all back in on Star Wars. Let's do this, baby. Let's talk about Star Wars. So I went to my script that I had finished for this particular episode, which is for Solo, a Star Wars story. We have ranked Star Wars episode 1, 2, and 3. The ranking is as follows. Number 1 is Star Wars episode 3. Number 2, Star Wars episode 2, and number 3 is Star Wars episode 1. They got better as they went, but they're not entirely great. Although my thoughts and feelings on episode 3 was that it's actually pretty good. It's a lot better than most people give it credit for. And every time I watch that movie, by the time I get to the end, I'm like, wow, I've really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. Plus, you get to see some cool stuff with Obi-Wan and Anakin, and then go watch Ahsoka because it's great. There's a bunch of other things that all like tie into that. But this episode is about Solo, which arguably is a movie we didn't need. And I'm excited to talk about that and get into the thick of it. But as a reminder for this series, we're going through episodically, basically, for each movie, and then once I finish all of the movies, I'm going to switch to the TV shows and rank them separately and together. So there'll be a separate TV ranking and a ranking for everything all together as well. So like an ultimate master list, and then just a movie list and just a TV list. If you're enjoying this series, or maybe you're even new to it, welcome. I am glad that you're here. Make sure that you remain subscribed to the channel to see these pop up every Thursday from here on out. There may be breaks here and there as we go, just maybe like 1 or 2 week breaks for other things that I have scheduled. But for the most part, this is going to be coming out on Thursdays now, which is quite exciting. If you like this video also, make sure to like it and leave a comment on what you thought about my list ranking so far. And of course, what you thought about Solo, a Star Wars story. So let's just jump right into the stats on this movie. So first, it was released on May 25th, 2018 with a budget of somewhere between 275 and 300 million and a box office of 393.2 million, which is not a great return on investment. This movie was a flop. It was an absolute flop. It did not do very well. Even though you look at $400 million, like that's pretty good, but just the budget for the movie was 300 million, and then that's not considering a bunch of other things for this movie, such as marketing and whatnot. There was an interesting thing with the directors. Basically, there was a falling out with Kathleen Kennedy, who was one of the heads for Lucasfilm, and the original directors, Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, and there was Chris Dickens. So basically a few people who were the head of the movie pushing it through, and there was a falling out on the way that it was being filmed and the way that it was turning out. It just was a lot more off the cuff, and it just wasn't feeling like a Star Wars movie. So they fired those original people and brought in Ron Howard to finish the movie, and you could tell it's a disjointed mess, and we will talk about my thoughts as we go, and definitely at the end when I summarize. I have a few stats, or not stats, but trivia things here for you. So Dryden Voss, our main bad guy, his facial stripes were added in post-production. They weren't there during the filming, or they didn't even consider it maybe, but they wanted him to make be a little bit more evil looking. And they don't look bad, but it is kind of like that's an odd feature that changes and whatnot as we go. This is the first Star Wars film in official canon where nobody speaks the word Jedi. It's an interesting one. The Imperial March theme is played in a major key. That was the same used during the parade in the Rebels episode Empire Day. Star Wars Rebels, go watch it, man. Go watch Star Wars Rebels and go watch Ahsoka. Han Solo was originally going to appear in the Battle of Kashyyyk in Episode 3, in which An orphaned 10-year-old Han Solo who is being raised by Chewbacca helps Obi-Wan Kenobi to locate and find General Grievous by finding part of a transmitter droid that was sending signals from Utapau. Ooh, that would have been a really different setup for Han Solo, huh? The opening scene on Corellia takes place 13 years before the events of Episode 4, which is around the same time that director Krennic is taking Galen Erso in Rogue One, which is the next movie in this series that we're going to cover. Excited for that one. And then finally, Han claims to own a VCX 100 when he's talking to Lando for the first time. This is the same ship as the Ghost from Star Wars Rebels, the same model. And again, go watch Rebels and go watch Ahsoka because it's freaking great. But without further ado, let's jump into the plot. And there is no title crawl, but there is a title crawl. Kind of. It's bad. It's a lawless time. Crime syndicates compete for resources, food and medicine and hyperfuel. On the shipbuilding planet of Corellia, the foul lady Proxima forces runaways into a life of crime in exchange for shelter and protection. On these mean streets, a young man fights for survival, but he yearns to fly among the stars. Great. It's not great. It's not great. It's not what I wanted the movie to start with. They should have just not gone with anything like that and just thrown us into the movie. But they didn't, and that was their choice. And it is unfortunate because it's not great. So Han, at the beginning of the movie, hijacks his speeder and hangs his lucky dice, which is going to come back around many times here, and makes his way to Kira, as he explains how he got away from exchange of coaxium, basically like a drug deal. He steals a vial to get them off of Corellia, so they're going to sell it to get off. And they set off to the spaceport, but are captured by Lady Proxima's goons. These scenes in this movie are so dark. I remember in the movie theater, I saw this movie twice in the theater because I went once with my dad, and then I went once with my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and goodness, it was so dark. I don't understand. You can't see anything. It's bad. But Lady Proxima, this like nasty worm thing, wants her money. And Han tries to trick Proxima into thinking that he has a thermal detonator, which is a funny throwback, yet not throwback because this happens before episode 4, or not episode 4, but episode 6. It's just, it's a weird thing, but I like this moment where, he's got the thermal detonator and she's kind of sees through it and she's like, that's a rock and you just made a clicking noise with your mouth. It's funny, but it's kind of a weird note to start this movie on, and that automatically kind of sets the tone for the rest of the movie. And it's at this point I'm still hopeful when I'm watching this for the first time. I'm still going, oh, this is odd. I got to get into the feel of this. It doesn't feel quite like Star Wars. There's Star Wars-y things here, but it doesn't feel like it yet. I'm kind of excited to see where this goes. And then he throws the rock and breaks a window to the outside, and the light burns Proxima's face and allows he and Kira to escape onto speeders, which is a slightly faster chase sequence than the one in the Book of Boba Fett. And it's just... it feels bad. I'm not hyper into this at all. After breaking through an Imperial checkpoint during this chase scene, they're tagged by a couple of troopers on speeder bikes, and they join the chase, which is funny. But Han is able to barely escape by flipping his speeder sideways and going through like a really tight space. And there's a beat here where, there's a joke because the speeder gets stuck awkwardly between the two buildings. Unfortunately, while I may have chuckled at this the first time, I distinctly remember seeing the joke happen before it happens, right? You see the end result coming up before it happens, and therefore it's just less funny. You're like, oh, that was an obvious joke that they went for there. And it has a throwback later in the movie, or it recalls something later in the movie for when we get there, but it's just kind of like a weird moment, and it's fine. And they jump out and race towards the spaceport with Proxima's goons like hot on their trail. And after arriving at the spaceport, they try to bribe the Imperial at the ticketing gate, in order to get through, but due to their hesitation, only Han is able to get through the gate before like a full lockdown happens. And he promises he's going to come back for Kira, but is forced to like disappear into the crowd. And in a moment of panic, he doesn't know what to do. He enlists into the Imperial Navy, and when he's asked what his name is, he says Han. And he's like, "What's your surname?" And he says, doesn't have one. He doesn't have any people. So the officer stupidly, this is one of the worst parts of this movie, puts down his surname as Solo. And it was at this point, so like, with the Lady Proxima stuff, I'm like, oh, this is an interesting feel. I can get into this. All right, let me get comfortable here in this movie, and we'll be a lot along for the ride, right? I'm giving the movie the benefit of the doubt. And it was when this happened, I remember I just put my hand in my head, or my hand and my hands against my head. And I was just like, no, it's not, I can't give this movie a benefit of the doubt. This is going to be a bad movie. And despite Han Solo's best efforts and desires, he does not become a pilot in the Imperial Navy, but is instead a basic infantryman 3 years later. This battle that they show is actually awesome, and it's something we don't really get to see in Star Wars, at least in the cinematic universe, of like these like kind of dark, gritty ground battles. But it is something, this particular battle is something that I would imagine a Warhammer 40k movie might look like. The only thing it's missing is some like grand defeat about to happen. Like a giant rout is about to happen on their unit, and it gets really dark and a bunch of people die, and then a space marine would show up and push, whatever enemy they're fighting back, whether it be like Tyranids or whatnot. That's the only thing this is missing to make it a 40k thing. It's got a weird feel to it, but I like it. I like this moment. Solo is introduced to Beckett and his crew, Val and Rio. They show up. They very clearly have a better read of the situation, kind of take control. But, Han knows something's up. So Han follows Beckett's orders, and they push forward to victory in this battle. But then later in the trenches, Solo's following Beckett around because he believes that he might be able to get off this planet with their help once he realizes that they're not actually a part of the Empire. And Solo confronts Beckett with like this superior officer nearby. He tries to convince Beckett to let Han help them steal a ship, but Beckett gives Han up to the lieutenant as like, hey, this guy's a deserter. And they decide to basically feed Han to the beast, and he's knocked out or knocked down into a pit, and they hear like this ominous animal sound coming from deep within the trench, and out pops a Wookiee, and it just so happens to be Chewie, and this is dumb. Han is able to talk to Chewie in a bad version of Shirawook and convinces him to knock down the pillar in the center of this hole that they're both in, allowing them both to escape. Ah, goodness, this breaks my heart because this is the reinforcing moment from earlier where I'm like, oh, why did they need this? Like, this could have been way better. And it was also at this point that I realized what this movie was gonna be. I realized it was gonna be a bad movie with the Solo part. And at this point, I realized it was just gonna be a reference movie. It's gonna be how many references can we throw into this movie as we go, just to make you go, oh, hey, like I remember that thing from these other three movies. And it's not great. I don't think I like seeing Chewie. I like seeing Han and Chewie interact with each other. I even like his performance of Han Solo. I don't think it's bad. I actually think it's fairly okay. It's passable. But just something about constantly having to add these things in just because feels like they have a checklist of references they need to get, and things that they have to explain from the four movies and all the references from the three movies and all the references in those. It just kind of feels like they're trying to go through some weird formula, and it doesn't work on me. But Chewie knocks Han through the pillar, causing the guards to fall through, and they both run different directions, which is a funny little bit because Chewie is so big and they're tied together, and that chain just like pulls Han along. But he convinces Chewie that the only way off the planet is using the ship that Beckett's crew is in the middle of stealing. Beckett is reluctant to pick them up, but is convinced by Rio to do so. They then head off to Vander 1, this cool icy planet, where Beckett plans to make some big heist. And Han convinces Chewie that they just need to do this one job. It's always we just need to do one job. And in this case, it's with Beckett to try to make some money. Then they can finally be free, which obviously to Chewie is a big deal. That means a lot to him, as we're about to learn, because Han asks Chewie what his name is. He obviously says Chewbacca, and Han says that he's not gonna be saying that all the time. He needs a nickname. This was unnecessary. This goes back to the whole, we have a reference checklist of things that we have to explain, and it just feels stupid. Some things are left better not explained, right? It makes more sense for him to just one day be, calling him Chewie. We don't have to have him explain why he's going to call him Chewie. It just makes sense. We don't need that explained to us. It also makes their relationship feel less natural. And I don't like that. Because, what we see in Star Wars Episode 4 at the very beginning of their story together that we know of, it just feels like a natural thing that they've got going on. And Harrison Ford does a great job of conveying that to, or with, a character that doesn't speak, really. There's audible things and you can kind of ascertain what Chewie's trying to say, but I think Harrison Ford carries that performance really, really well, and you see that they're very well bonded, and we see that throughout the rest of the movies, even through Episode 7, where we see them again, and their connection is great. I love it. But during this scouting of this train that they're planning to perform a heist on to get this coaxium, Val mentions that Emphas Nest and the Cloud Riders are hot on their trail for this heist, and that they might have competition. That's kind of an exciting thing. It's like, oh, okay, this is gonna have some escalation here. And she also suggests replacing Han with Bosk or the Zahn sisters. And that's funny, but again, this is another thing that's like, we can try to put all these references in here to just make people constantly pointing at the screen being like, oh, I know who Bosk is. And if you don't know who Bosk is, he's the Trandoshan lizard guy who's a bounty hunter that we see in Star Wars Episode 4. Star Wars Episode 5. And then we also see him in plenty of stuff before that in Clone Wars, and I think he's possibly in Rebels. I'm trying to remember. I don't quite remember, but Bosk is everywhere up until the point where we just don't see him anymore. I think he ends up dying in 5 or some other movie. During the night before the heist at their camp, Beckett convinces Val that things are going to be okay. You just got to chill out, girl. And that they're going to clear their debts, and that he's going to learn to play the Val Accord. And it's kind of this endearing moment. And I would say it's this moment in the movie that I go, man, I really like Beckett. I think Woody's performance of Beckett is very good. And this is a character that I enjoy seeing on the screen. He's a character you don't like. You're like, oh, he's kind of scummy. But you like the performance of him. And I think that that's pretty good. But Han also shares his story about wanting to go back to Corellia for Kira, and how he swore that he'll become a pilot and get a ship and go back for her. And Chewie says that the Wookiees were enslaved by the Empire and taken off Kashyyyk, and that he'll use his share of the money to search for his tribe. And it's like, wow, you guys really opened up there. Nobody else was kind of was pouring their hearts out here like you two did. It's a bit much. Just chill out, you two. Han also gets his iconic pistol from Beckett at this point, and then on the following day, they begin the heist as the train shows up. Beckett, Han, and Chewie work to secure the train car that has all the coaxium on it, and Val prepares to blow up the bridge further down the track so that the train car can be pulled free using the ship that they brought in. Right, so you kind of see all the pieces coming together, and you're like, oh, this is a cool heist thing. I like this. I wish that... Because, overall, this is a heist movie. And this particular heist is set up pretty good. The stakes are high. You feel it. The heist later on feels less like a heist to me. So it's just kind of like a weird pacing thing. But this one I do really like. And, just when you think things are going well on this heist, as I said, the stakes are high. These Imperial troopers attempt to stop the crew from securing the coaxium. They release part of the train that the troopers are on and continue like on their getaway, which is kind of funny. They just like leave them behind, but not before Enfys Nest and the Cloud Riders show up to spoil their plans and try to steal this coaxium. Also, the music when Enfys Nest shows up is great. I absolutely love the theme. It's also totally not clear in this movie that Enfys Nest is the main marauder or the main pirate. That's their name, and then the Cloud Riders are the group of them, the grouping of pirates. But let's just make that clear, so for the rest of this review, we refer to them correctly here. That is technically how they are referred to. So the crew fights most of the marauders off, but Rio takes a shot from one of them and that ends up getting on board, and then the fading Rio is unable to really keep his ship under control. He's dying like in the pilot seat. So Han is forced to jump up on board and take control of the ship as it like crashes into the train. Val sees that things are not going well. Like they're not going to make it. And these Viper droids are alerted to the heist. And that gives away her position because she starts firing at them to try to slow them down. And the Cloud Riders manage to attach several cables to the train in an effort to steal it. And then when the train breaks free, they're planning on riding away with it. But Rio ends up dying from his wounds. Things are not looking good here. Val sees no option but to blow up the bridge while she's on it, which is a shame because she's freaking fantastic and she's just gone like within the first 20 minutes of this movie. And then she sacrifices herself for the good of the heist, which also doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I never really got that vibe that she was going to have that kind of determination for this. But the train breaks free from the track and this tug of war begins between the Cloud Riders and the ship. They're unable to break free or gain any ground, which means that Han is actually forced to drop the cargo at the last moment into the mountainside that they're about to hit. And this epic explosion destroys that mountain. And it just shows how powerful this coaxium is. That's a cool moment because they kind of play it up as this stuff is unstable, but we don't really see or know just how unstable it is. And then seeing that explosion, it sets the stakes. You're like, okay, cool. For the rest of this movie, anytime they mention coaxium, you know what it can do. And I like that. And Beckett mourns his crew members, which, yeah, he absolutely should. He punches Han in the face for not listening. He reveals that they weren't just stealing for themselves. They were hired by the Crimson Dawn, which is a crime syndicate, which is really cool. There's a bunch of crime syndicates. The Crimson Dawn is one of them. Pike Syndicate's like another one. Those might be the ones that you are most familiar with at the moment. But they're trying to steal the coaxium for the Crimson Dawn. And the only way he sees getting out of this situation is to speak with Dryden Voss, the head of the Crimson Dawn himself. And Han backs it. He's effectively getting himself stuck in the thick of it here, which is a weird move because at this point he could just go. It seems like Beckett's just allowing him to leave, but Han is making a stupid choice of being like, no, I'm in on this. I want to be a part of this. He just doesn't realize, I think, the veracity of his situation that he's trying to sign up for. So Dryden shows up shortly thereafter on his crazy cool yacht, and the crew makes their way on board to speak with him, and they enter to find a party and await Dryden, who needs to join them, but he's in the middle of a meeting. Beckett informs Han not to look at anyone, and none of these people are his friends. It's an interesting thing because in Star Wars Episode 7, when they enter Maz's castle thing, Han actually says something very similar to the people who are with him. It says just don't stare. And they're stare at what? He said to any of it. It's kind of the same thing kind of going on here. Just don't talk to anybody. Nobody's your friend here. And Han tries to keep his eyes down, keep to himself, but while walking around, he finds none other than Kira and is understandably ecstatic. This woman that he wanted to go back for, his whole meaning of life up to this point that we can see is to try to get a ship to go back for Kira and to free her. And then suddenly she's just right in front of him. It would be a little shocking. She reveals that she actually works on board the yacht, and Han tells her that he was on his way back to get her. It's like, man, you've been doing this for 3 years. You've made no progress on it. It's not great. Han asks Kira how she got out of Corellia, and he understandably is very confused here when she says that she didn't, and they begin to kind of walk and talk, and Han sees her Crimson Dawn tattoo, kind of signaling that she's a part of this syndicate. And it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of coming together here. Beckett shows up and confronts Han about speaking to people, like shut up while you speaking to people. And we are informed that Kira knows Beckett, and Dryden Voss then interrupts the conversation and reveals that Kira is actually his top lieutenant. It's like, okay, now the pecking order is kind of established here. We understand what's going on. The crew has a meeting in Dryden's private quarters. Dryden, great bad guy. I love the way that he is played. It's fantastic. The scar things on his face, I could see why they look weird now that, knowing that they were added in post-production. But overall, very cool character. Beckett is confronted by Dryden about the failure, and Dryden just kind of alludes to this mysterious boss that he has to answer to, right? And we'll talk about that when we get to it later in the movie. But he's on the verge of just like killing them all. It's about to happen. But then Beckett says that he'll deliver what was promised, right? The coaxium. In an effort to kind of think outside the box, Han suggests stealing unrefined coaxium instead of refined. It'll be easier to find, such on planets like Kessel. But the small problem is the Pikes control Kessel, the Pikes being another syndicate in the crime syndicates, and not something that the Crimson Dawn want to go to war over between these two syndicates because, well, they actually kind of are all under one umbrella. You don't want them fighting each other. So Han suggests that they will be able to work with impunity since none of the Pikes know the crew. And Chewie suggests that there's a planet nearby, Kessel, where they could get the coaxium to be refined on, but they would need a super fast ship in order to reach the refinery before it explodes, because apparently there's like a time frame on it. We're now establishing speed rules. Speed, great movie, but it's an interesting thing to throw into this movie. I guess it's a thing to increase the stakes of what's going on, but it's just is it necessary? I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it too hard, but Dryden forces Kira to go with them to ensure that it's successful, and if the heist goes wrong, Dryden will be out of options, has to kill them all. Again, great bad guy. Great bad guy stuff. Love it. Kira points the crew in the direction of a Lando in order to get their fast ship. Lando apparently won his ship playing a sabacc and loves his ship so much that he's never going to part with it. But Han is confident that he could get the ship to himself by playing sabacc against Lando. However, he's totally unaware that Lando is actually a cheater. And Donald Glover, oh my goodness, the best part of this movie. He is really, honestly, one of the redeeming factors of this movie. He is so good as Lando. He nails the cadence of the speech. He is just young Lando. It's great. And then Lando does that whole Han pronunciation thing as like a dig to him during their interaction here, and it just lands perfectly. It's a fun scene, this whole sabacc scene. Also, once the cheat happens and it's revealed that Lando is a cheater, but he's gonna win, and then Han is just so pissed off because he knows that he cheated at that point. We get battle bots. It's just like these random robots just fighting each other in this bar area. And then we also learn that Lando's got this facade of someone who's kind of got everything together. Like he's kind of this cool cat, but that breaks down fairly quickly as we get through these handful of scenes here with him. Kira proposes that they do the Kessel run, and we learn that Beckett in this moment, has also apparently killed Aura Singh in the past. Aura Singh is a famous bounty hunter. If you're familiar with the Clone Wars or Rebels and stuff like that, Aura Singh worked with Cad Bane for a while too. So really cool that name is dropped. But it, even though I like that reference, I like that this is kind of a cool thing that, oh, now we know Beckett is the one who killed her. It's still kind of like, man, this is just another checkbox that you guys are going through on a list of like, oh, we got to add this reference in there because we can. It's annoying. We're introduced to L3, which is Lando's droid. Seemingly a sentient droid. Where this comes from, I don't know. We don't really have any other analogs like this in any of the movies or TV shows. I mean, we got droids that are like sassy and whatnot, but not like this. This is like straight up a sentient droid. And that's a little odd. She doesn't quite fit Star Wars, but do I like the character? Yes and no. We'll talk about that as we go. You know what? Here's a good way to put it. I feel like she's a player character in someone's Star Wars tabletop game who's playing a droid. That's what L3 feels like to me. It's an odd thing. Anyway, her like greatest goal in life is to want all of her droid kind freed, even though droids are pretty typically happy just being a droid. She seems to be the only one unhappy with it. L3 also apparently has the best like nav data in her databanks, and there's this weird scene where they're trying to break into this shipyard to get to the Falcon, and she says like you can't, like, don't look at me or like turn around or whatever while she's trying to hack into this place, and she says I can't perform while you're looking at me, and it just made me want to gag. I was like, this is a joke that does not work in Star Wars. It's a funny joke if this is not Star Wars. I will laugh at this joke in not a Star Wars movie, but just like in Star Wars Episode 7, future spoilers here, episodes 8, when we get the your mama joke, that's another joke that does not work here. It doesn't work in Star Wars. This I can't perform with you looking at me does not work in Star Wars, and it's just out of place. This reeks of the bad writing or the split writing or the split directing or whatever the heck was going on with this movie with all of that weirdness, and I don't like it. But it turns out the Falcon is actually impounded, but the crew frees it. They break free of it and they manage to get away. But the Cloud Riders have actually put a tracking beacon on the ship before they took off, which is important to put a pin in, because that will explain how they show up later. Chewie plays holo chess with Beckett on board, and Han tries to get fresh with Kira, but there's just so many capes. I love this. I love that Han and Kira are just like having this conversation about all of Lando's capes. It works because it's like, man, I love Lando. I love the weird cape thing. It fits his character very well. Han also still seemingly believes that he and Kira can have a life together. He's very just delirious. He's like a high schooler who thinks that he's gonna marry this woman, right? And everybody else around was like, dude, like, this is not how life works. Just kind of let it go. If it happens, it happens. But otherwise, like chill out. She's also clearly been through some stuff and is trying to communicate that with him, and he's just not listening. He's just so in love with this idea, which is weird because it kind of makes him more of a one-dimensional character, and I don't like that. And Beckett has this kind of one-on-one with Han. He says, "You want to know how I survived as long as I have? I trust no one. Assume everyone will betray you and you will never be disappointed." A thing that will come up later in the movie, of course, but is a cool line. And this is a line that I think if you're going to write any kind of like smuggler or bounty hunter thing in Star Wars, any kind of scum and villainy, this is like the modus operandi. I think this is exactly what you write those characters for. They don't trust anyone. They assume everybody's going to betray them. And that is how you write a good scoundrel. And I like that. I think it works really well for this movie. And that's actually kind of what makes Beckett so good, is because he's written in a way that makes you feel like he's a real character. He's also portrayed that way by Woody, and I think that he does a great job. The crew arrives at the Maelstrom outside of Kessel. They begin making their way towards the planet, and the visuals are super cool here. It's great. It's like, man, did all your budget go into this part of the movie? L3 and Kira have a girl talk moment on the ship, and it's super weird. Like, the performances are great. Obviously, two great actresses, but it's kind of like the can't perform while you're looking at me thing. It just doesn't work in Star Wars. If this was any other movie, I would have loved this scene. Again, it's performed well. It's actually written quite well, but it just doesn't fit in this movie or this world, this universe that we're watching these movies in, and I don't like it. They land on the planet of Kessel, though, and we get to see our first look at live-action Pikes, which is great. Pikes are really weird aliens, and we get to see one with his mask on. We later get to see these in the Book of Boba Fett, but it's cool to see one in a movie for the very first time. Beckett's also wearing the same bounty hunter disguise that they use in Return of the Jedi, which is pretty cool. But again, it goes back to that whole, you're just checking things off of a reference list. I don't like it. And Han and Chewie are, pretending to be slaves, and Kira kind of roughs Han up a bit, hands him his dice. Those stupid dice. We'll talk about the dice in just a moment. Actually, you know what? Let's just get it out of the way now, because there's no reason for me to bring it up later in the movie. They come back later in the movie, and it's a pointless little nod that they do. This dice thing it felt like the producers and the people running Lucasfilm trying to do the whole Marvel universe thing where they have like all of these nods in different movies that all kind of back each other up and have these references that you're like, oh yeah, like if you've seen this movie, you would understand why these dice are here. So like in Star Wars Episode 7, or sorry, 8, I don't know, I keep mixing those two up. When the dice show up at the end of the movie, it's like you see them when you first watch that movie, because that Episode 8 came out before Solo, if I remember correctly. And then, yeah, it did. And then Solo comes out and it shows the dice thing, and you're like, oh, why do I need to see these stupid dice? You don't need to connect these movies in any way. We literally have the characters from these two movies that are, a part of these movies. Why? I don't need the reference of the dice. It just is a weird thing. And they've thankfully seemingly have stopped doing that. And I can appreciate that, because I think they got really bad feedback for it. Han and Chewie begin their escape in this elevator that they're in. Chewie rips off the arms of the guard, which is another checkbox for a reference later when they talk about Chewie ripping the arms clean off of somebody. So stupid, but I mean, it's a funny moment in the movie, but it's just, you start getting wise to it and you're like, oh, okay, this is yet another one of those references. Beckett clears out the command station, and Kira takes out the Pike that she was supposed to be negotiating with. It's actually a really cool little maneuver she does, and L3's like, whoa, like I've never seen anyone do that before. It's good choreography. L3 then begins droid revolution, of course she does, and all of the freed droids release like everyone's restraints in the facility somehow. I don't understand how that's supposed to work, but it does. And Chewie goes off on his own to free some enslaved Wookiees, and during this, Han goes and finds the coaxium in the vault here, loads it up, takes it back to the ship. Everything happens pretty quick, but it's a good pace at this point in the movie. Han is spotted by some guards, and then Chewie just shows back up with Wookiee backup. It's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. L3, though, is shot while they're loading the coaxium onto the ship. It's this big, like, revolution happening in this mining facility. All the slaves are being freed. And, yeah, L3 is shot. And then Lando runs to go save her. And, man, freaking Donald Glover. So fantastic in this movie. He is such a good actor. And this is one of the only moments in this movie where you feel like real emotion. It's like with this and later on in the movie with Beckett at the very end. And like you just feel like he's really connected to this droid. Like he actually loves this droid on a level that you would if it was like your companion on your ship all the time. And it's just so good. I love this moment. But the crew go back onto the ship and leave the planet, but also like leave behind all of the slaves. How did they get off the planet? Wouldn't you have expected a bunch of slaves to like try to attempt to jump onto the ship in panic or something. It's just kind of odd that they just kind of take off and it's like, okay, have fun with your revolution. Like, what are those slaves even planning to do? How do they plan to get off the planet, let alone get through the maelstrom? Like, it just doesn't, it's a weird plot hole. But at the end of the day, I don't really care at this point. It's just one of those things that I've realized after rewatching it a couple times, like, wait a second, that doesn't really work. Anyway, so they need to get out. They've got the coaxium in their ship. They have a countdown going essentially before it's going to blow up because it slowly warms up over time. And when it reaches a certain temperature, it's just going to explode. The Empire shows up and we get one of the coolest shots of the movie with this giant Star Destroyer coming through the maelstrom. Han takes evasive maneuvers and heads into the maelstrom, but needs L3's navigation system, which needs to be hooked up to the Falcon in order for them to get through the maelstrom with enough time to refine the coaxium. This in itself is the Kessel Run that they talk about in future movies, about doing it in 12 parsecs. Honestly, one of the cooler parts of the movie, in my opinion. Did they need to show it? No, not at all. It was dumb. That could have just been that throwaway line in episode 4, but it's still cool. It's still cool to see it. It's a cool moment, but it doesn't need to be here. But we get a throwaway line that Chewie is 190 years old. Feels super unnecessary. Again, we're just checking boxes of like, let's explain everything to our viewership that doesn't need explaining because they're actually Star Wars nerds and they have a lot of information that most people don't, but they explain it to all the people that they're taking to see the movie with anyways. You don't need to explain it in the movie. Han shows off some really impressive flying and we get this creepy, cool, big, bad alien in space that tries to get the Falcon as they interface L3 with the ship. Han uses this maw that they are at as a gravity well to suck the creature into it, but they don't have enough power to break free themselves, and Beckett places a drop of the coaxium into the reactor. They use it to make like the super boost out of the maw, and once they're clear, they jump to hyperspace instead of getting stuck like earlier in the movie. Remember earlier in the movie with the speeder getting stuck between the wall and getting wedged in and there being a comedic beat that just doesn't hit very well. That's what they're trying to allude to later in the movie here, where he finally made it. He didn't get his ship stuck between this like closing gap. It's okay. It just happened so quick and you're like, whatever, let's move on. The coaxium then gets offloaded and refined once they land. And the Falcon is in super bad shape, and it's kind of funny. Han then tries to convince Kira to join him after they get paid, and then, they can finally go off on their own, but she denies him because she's stuck in this system, stuck in this syndicate. And unfortunately for the crew, the Cloud Riders also show up to take the coaxium. And we get that awesome musical sting again. I love it every time. It's just, I don't know what it is about it. It almost reminds me of the musical sting that you get in The Witcher anytime you like complete a quest in The Witcher 3. It's great. We learn more though about these marauders and how they're actually trying to rise up against the crime syndicates and the Empire. We learned that Emphas Nest is actually this younger girl. And, we get a cool moment here where they're trying to explain stuff to Han and the crew. So Han doesn't want to give Crimson Dawn the coaxium, but Beckett, he's trying to convince him, not so sure. Beckett actually chooses to leave instead of going along with this whole plan. And we learn that there's some gangster on Tatooine with some big job. Again, another reference we don't need. Stop doing this. It's obviously Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. It obviously points Han in the right direction. But, there's a lot of time between this movie and episode 4 still in the timeline. And why? Why do we need to know this? We don't need to know how Han Solo eventually ends up with Jabba the Hutt. If you didn't explain literally everything in this one 2-day period of Han Solo's life that everything references later on in these other movies, you could have possibly had, number one, a better movie, and number two, other movies. That would have been cool. Just so annoying. Anyways, Han, Chewie, and Kira head to Dryden's ship after Beckett has taken off, and they're going to try to dupe him. They tell Dryden that Beckett died trying to save Han's life,
And there's this tense moment because Dryden wants Han to open the coaxium. He's very clearly skeptical of all of this. He's thinking that, that Han did not bring him the real coaxium. He even has him bring this vial to him of this refined coaxium. And Dryden's like, how did you do it? How did you make it look real? And it's this really tense scene. And I mean, most of the scenes with Dryden in this movie are really good, and this is no exception. We learn that Beckett apparently he was a traitor. He told Dryden of their plan before they enacted it, and he shows up through the elevator to like crash this party, and the Crimson Dawn guards just like, I don't know, they pop out of nowhere to try to take out the Cloud Riders, and it just feels weird. It's like, shouldn't you have seen them in this like little desert area? Anyways, they show up to try to take out the Cloud Riders to get the real coaxium back. And then Han tells Beckett that he was paying attention this entire time, and that Beckett was right. People are predictable. And the Crimson Dawn, it jumps over. The Crimson Dawn guards discover that the coaxium that they thought was with the Cloud Riders is actually fake. And then they're ambushed by them. And there's that awesome musical sting again as Enfys Nest like takes people out. It's awesome. And then Beckett realizes, right, he draws the lines here, and he realizes that if the cases were empty out there, that the real coaxium is actually in the room with them all along. And then Beckett takes out Dryden's guards real quick, so he has a chance to kind of think about his options, give himself some breathing room. He orders Chewie to pack up the coaxium and go with him, leaving Han, Dryden, and Kira alone. And so far, I will say, I love this. This is awesome. This whole scene, how it plays out, how as a viewer at first blush, you're really unsure of what's actually going on. Is this the real coaxium? Is it not the real coaxium? And then you get like the reveal that it is the real one. And you're like, oh, this is really cool. But then you're still not certain. You're like, wait, how is this all going to pan out? There's like those layers of confusion going on of like who is actually who's the double agent here? Who's actually going through with it? Because then we get another turn where, Han, as soon as the doors close, Han leaps for his blaster, Dryden grabs some vibro daggers, which are really cool, and this fight ensues where Kira jumps out with a sword and neutralizes Han, and you're like, oh crap, she's like, she's turned. Here comes the everything is just changing constantly, like who is on whose side. And then she says like she's gonna take Han out, but then the way that she's saying it is alluding to that, you always go for like your opponent's weakness, and in that case for Dryden Voss it is Kira, and she fights him with the sword and the vibro daggers, and it's just awesome. The choreography in the scene is great. It's awesome. I love the whole thing. She takes out Dryden Voss, and then Kira sends Han after Beckett and tells him that she's going to gather valuables on the ship so they can buy a ship together, and then they will go off like into the sunset together. Which is cool, but she has no intention of following him. As soon as he's gone, she goes and grabs Dryden Voss's like decoder ring and essentially assumes the role as the head of the Crimson Dawn. She uses the ring to contact the head of the crime syndicates, which is, yes, you guessed it, Darth Maul, and notifies him that Dryden is dead. And this is cool because I have watched Rebels, and I have watched, well, I guess Rebels is later on in this, but I have watched all of the Clone Wars, and I understand that Darth Maul did not die in Star Wars Episode 1. He falls down into a pit. He goes, he's basically in a trash pit. Eventually he gets rescued by another Dathomirian, and he's brought back to the head of the Night Sisters, Mother Talzin, and they basically restore him. They give him legs. At first he's got like spider legs when they first find him because he like has attached his body to this, but it's weird. But anyways, they give him like real mechanical legs, and they kind of have to restore his mind a little bit. It's a cool storyline throughout the Clone Wars, but the Clone Wars does end with Ahsoka confronting Maul. That he doesn't die, right? So he continues, because he eventually kind of works in the shadows and controls the crime syndicates, the Pikes, the Crimson Dawn, the Death Watch, and a bunch of other stuff. So like, he's really cool in the way that he does that. So for me, watching this movie for the first time, I hadn't watched Clone Wars yet, but I knew that Darth Maul didn't die, and that he was alive somewhere in the universe, because I had talked to other people about it. So then I saw him pop up in this movie. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I like that. And then I went and watched Clone Wars, and everything made sense. But I really like that he's here. I like that she talks to him, because it's this cool thing. As a person who has no idea what's going on, you get really confused. And I remember I talked with my dad about it. He was like, wait, I thought Darth Maul died in Star Wars Episode 1. Is this before Episode 1? Wait, why is Han Solo so old in comparison? I was like, no. So I had to explain it to him. And that was a fairly clued in viewer. So yeah, I could see how this would be very confusing for an average person. So it's a weird thing to put in this movie, but I like that it's here as a person who loves Star Wars. Fun little fact here: Ray Park, who is the physical actor for Darth Maul, is doing the physical performance here, but Sam Witwer, which is the voice actor for Darth Maul through the Clone Wars and everything, he's doing the voice. So you get the Darth Maul voice that we actually know, and the physical performance from the physical actor that we know, and it's great. It's freaking fantastic. I love it. Beckett, after this, is confronted by Han, because as if you're like so distracted by Darth Maul that you forget that other things are going on in this movie. Beckett goes out, confronts, Han goes out and confronts Beckett, and Beckett's basically just like about to give him this monologue, and then Han just shoots him before he can even finish his thought, which was smart, because apparently Beckett was going to kill him, as he confesses. And then Kira just takes off in the yacht and leaves Han behind, presumably never to see each other again, but I mean, you never know. And then Enfys Nest takes the coaxium and alludes to this like greater rebellion that they're hoping to get. I think it's assumed at this point. I don't have a confirmation. I have not looked into this, but for me, I would assume that they are in contact with Luthen or Saw Gerrera to some degree, and they're a part of that rebellion like network that happens that we see in Andor. Which, go watch Andor. It's freaking great. Then at the very end, Han takes the vial of coaxium, just one of it, and heads back to Lando, where he's finding him playing another game of sabacc. And as they roll up, Han like is really pissed off at him, but notices the card dealer in Lando's sleeve, and then like suddenly embraces him and obviously steals the cards. Which you would think that Lando would be wise to that at any point and be able to figure out that the cards are missing during this game of sabacc. But anyways, he plays the game of sabacc. It gets in the same position as earlier in the movie, where Lando has put the Falcon up as a call, and then Han plays his cards as Lando is unable to cheat and unable to win, and Han wins the Falcon fair and square. And that's the end of the movie. That's the end of Solo, a Star Wars story. What a ride. So, I guess my overall thoughts of this movie is that it is very middling, bad at times, with great moments. Anything with Lando, I think is really great. Donald Glover does a great job. You've got anything with Beckett, I think is pretty good. Like his performance with Woody is great, and then Dryden Voss is also great. Heck, I even really like Kira. There's just weird things in there with the constantly having to check off a list of references and explain everything that happens, or that Han happens to mention in the original trilogy. Like all of it happens in this like 2-day period. It's just weird. I don't like that. That could have been done a lot better. But where does it fall on our list? Right. I think this is not going to be too divisive here. I think most people are going to agree with me, but there are going to be people who don't, and I'm going to be really curious to see who those people are. Definitely let me know in the comments where you end up putting this on your list versus my list here. But I think for me, I'm going to place it currently at number 2 between episode 2 and episode 3. So the final ranking will go episode 3 as number 1, Solo: A Star Wars Story at number 2, Star Wars Episode 2 at number 3, and Star Wars Episode 1 at number 4. I feel like it sits there. Why? Well, why do I have to justify it over episode 2? Well, I think episode 3 is just a better movie. I think the performances are great, and everything about episode 3 is a better movie than Solo: A Star Wars Story. But I feel like there are moments in Solo that are better than Attack of the Clones. You know, I like Dryden Voss. I really like Beckett. I like Kira, and I especially like just the performances that we get with Lando and the interactions between those different characters. I don't like all of the reference stuff, as we mentioned, but does that drop it down enough to go to one lower? No, I don't think it does. I think I like this movie better than Attack of the Clones, which says a lot. But it's going to make the ranking for things in the future a little bit more difficult putting it here, but I feel like this is my rightful spot to put this movie. Again, let me know in the comments where you think it should go versus the other movies. I know a lot of people who would put it right at the bottom, and I know some people who would put it even above episode 3. So it's kind of a weird divisive thing potentially here. This is where things start to diverge. And then next week we have Rogue One. And now that is going to be a fun one to review. It's going to be really fun to see people's reactions to my thoughts on it, because I haven't really talked too much about it since that movie came out, and that was a while ago. Yeah, and I can't wait to rank it here, because that's going to be a difficult one to place. You shall see my thoughts and how I feel about it. But with all of that being said, thank you very much for watching. Go watch Rogue One to prep for the next episode next Thursday. With all that being said, we shall see you all next time.